What's up everyone, welcome to another video. In this video, I'll walk you through replacing a rear coil spring and the seats or insulators in a 2005 front-wheel drive Saturn Vue. I will go step by step with some helpful tips. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe for more how-to and review videos. Now let's get started. Here are the required tools: an 18mm socket, an 18mm wrench, and a 13mm deep well socket. And I would also recommend a pry bar or a long screwdriver, penetrating oil, and maybe some anti-seize, if you're into that when reassembling rusty bolts. First, chalk the opposite wheel. I'm doing this wheel, the rear right, in this video. So, chalk the front left. Important note, replace the springs in pairs. Do the right and the left. Remove the plastic lug nut covers if you have them. Then, break the lug nuts loose. Jack up the vehicle and support it with a jack stand. I'm using 2 because why not? Next, remove the lug nuts and remove the wheel. I'm in here because this top coil insulator is damaged and needs to be replaced. We will need to remove 3 connections, 2 bolts and 1 nut. First is the sway bar link. There is a nut on the bottom that needs to be removed. Second is the shock absorber lower mounting bolt. This bolt needs to be removed. Third is the control arm bolt. This bolt needs to be removed, and it has a nut on the other end. If you want to spray them down with penetrating oil, apply it to the threaded connections on the shock absorber mounting bolt, on the control arm bolt, and the sway bar link bolt. Next, jack up the control arm about 1 inch to remove some tension, and leave the floor jack in place to support it. Now let's remove the 3 bolts. For the sway bar link, you need a 13mm deep well socket. A deep well is required because the threaded portion is very long. A standard socket is not deep enough to reach the nut. This one takes some time to remove. And here's the nut, a rubber bushing with a steel nut integrated into it. Next is the shock absorber lower mounting bolt. This requires an 18mm socket for the bolt head. The nut on the other side is fused to the clevis, and a wrench is not required to hold it. But, if needed, the nut is 18mm as well. Unfortunately, I don't have the footage of wrenching it out. Here it is, already wrenched out of the nut. The shot can be compressed by hand to work the bolt out. You can also continue to rotate the bolt to walk it out. Last is the control arm bolt. This is also an 18mm for the bolt head and the nut. After the bolt was free from the nut, I continued to rotate it to walk it out. You may have noticed there's a new shiny black shock absorber in place. It was an old rusty shock absorber a few seconds ago. I replaced it while I was in here, and I will post a separate video for how to replace the shock absorber. I will also post a separate video for the front struts. Now, with the 3 bolts removed, slowly lower the floor jack to release the compression in the coil spring. This time it got hung up on the knuckle, a good reminder to stay clear. Once the coil spring is uncompressed and at its free length, remove the floor jack and push the control arm down to release the coil. I had to dig this bottom insulator out of the control arm with a screwdriver. Taking a close look at the insulators, they are made perfect for the end of the coil to seat inside. On this half, it's molded for the cut end of the spring to fit in perfect. And rolling around on the other half, there's a holder for the spring to clip in and be held. Now let's get rid of these damaged old ones and install the new ones. Note that I am reusing the existing coil spring. It was okay. I only needed to replace the insulator. But swap in your new coil now if you need one. I'll put some part numbers in the description below for insulators. Now let's reinstall the new coil and insulators. First, vacuum out the control arm so the coil insulator sits cleanly. We don't want any debris trapped between the insulator and the control arm. Next, insert the coil spring with the insulators. Note that the top will fully seat. No problem there. But on the bottom, only the edge will seat, in the back of the control arm. I recommend placing the cut end of the coil at the contact point, so it keeps it properly seated. The opposite side, which will not be in contact with the control arm, and will be flopping around in the air, has that holder molded into the insulator, which will keep things in place. Then reposition the floor jack under the control arm and begin to elevate it. This will compress the coil spring. Here's a tip. Make sure the sway bar link bolt is going through the hole in the control arm as you elevate it. It is possible for it to miss the hole and get pushed up. As you elevate the control arm, it must be guided back into its mount on the knuckle. The knuckle is easy to move up and down, and the control arm can easily be moved left or right by rotating the floor jack. I easily got it pretty much there. Then used a pry bar to make some final alignment adjustments, then inserted the bolt. And tightened it down. Next, install the sway bar link nut. The ball joint of this link rotated all the way while I snugged it up tight. But just rotate the nut the opposite way a bit and it will center back up without loosening the nut. Last is the lower shock absorber bolt. Manipulate the shock as needed to align it. Then insert the bolt and tighten it down. Finish up by reinstalling the wheel and torquing the lug nuts. And don't forget to remove the wheel chocks. And that wraps it up. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more videos, drop any comments below, and I'll see you in the next video.